I'm going to be focusing on just one market, the UK, and motivators for investment in both the fixed line and mobile sectors. I'll say as an introduction that it is one of the largest markets in Europe. It's also one of the most competitive and one of the largest in terms of revenue. When it comes to competition in the fixed line sector, there are roughly 500 plus ISPs. However, 90% of all fixed line broadband subscribers are wrapped up with only about 4 of the major players. That includes the incumbent BT, Carphone Warehouse, Virgin, and Sky Broadband, of all people. In the mobile sector, you have a large number of resellers and MVNOs, but again, 90% of all subscribers are absorbed by the 5 main operators. Retail revenue has been falling since 2008, encumbered by pretty disastrous economic performance. However, investment has been relatively stable, hovering between 7.7 and 8 billion a year. So that's the background. Paul will be familiar with this. There's been quite a lot of work on this recently, and one of the things which makes the UK quite important at the moment is that week in, week out there's new developments. It's a very fast-moving sector. In common with most countries in the region, the advanced countries in the world, the government does have a broadband plan in situ. I'll say from the outset that it is chronically unambitious. It is also focused, as you can see, one of the drawbacks it is focused on British Telecom's current strategy of fibre to the cabinet, supplemented by state and EC contributions, and then in rural areas 10% coverage, not dissimilar to Australia and many other countries in the European region. How is this actually going to be facilitated? Well, if I can concentrate on the mobile sector, since 2004 there have been a number of quite astute, sympathetic regulatory measures. And these are broken down into 3 different sectors. Firstly, spectrum auctions. This is absolutely crucial. Legal wrangling for the last 3 years has delayed the auction of the 800 and 2.6 gigahertz bands. After a lot of toing and froing, the regulator said, enough is enough, we will auction this at the beginning of 2013. This is going to be a very significant investment opportunity for the mobile players. Secondly, network sharing. Again, since 2004, to stimulate 3G, the 5 operators have all variously got to bed with one another. There have been a few movements here and there, but after several years of bed hopping, what has happened is that you have a coalescence of 2 key groupings. Firstly is Orange and T-Mobile, which a couple of years ago formed themselves as Everything Everywhere, and now rebranded within the last couple of days, rebranded as EE, which makes it easier on the tongue. 3 UK has jumped in with that partnership because of an existing deal that they had with T-Mobile for 3G network sharing. And a couple of months ago, O2 and Vodafone realized that they simply couldn't finance or cope with competing with EE on their own. So they signed a very significant network sharing deal, which they hope will save them together about £1 billion in OPEX and also investment on the 4G network. So the UK's LTE landscape is effectively going to be 2 networks, one by EE and the other by this alliance of O2 and Vodafone. The third element to encourage investment is in refarming spectrum. Again, this has been long in play, the 900 and 1800 bands, they were allowed to be refarmed from 2G to 3G a few years ago. But what is absolutely crucial within the last 2 or 3 days is that the 1800 megahertz band, which is predominantly owned by EE, Ofcom, the telecoms regulator, allowed EE to use that for LTE, effectively as of 2 days ago. Now, this is significant not just because England is finally going to have an LTE network. Now, bear in mind that Scandinavia has had an LTE service, commercial service, since 2009, so the UK is very slow off the block. But it has been a catalyst on legal grounds as well, because over the last 6 months, when Ofcom first mooted the idea of allowing EE to refarm its spectrum for LTE, Vodafone and O2 have been splitting mad. They've resorted to the courts to try to stop the deal. On the one hand, it feels like it's just bad vibes, and one operator disliking the idea that the other operator can have an advantage, which of course is legitimate. But if you read between the lines, you can see that Vodafone and O2 have had their bluff called, because they've been resorting to the courts to try to delay their own investment. Now EE is first off the block. It is investing £1.5 billion in its LTE network. O2 and Vodafone now have to not necessarily match that investment, but they can't resort to the courts anymore. They know they've lost. They are now having to invest very rapidly to try and catch up with EE. £1.5 billion is an awful lot of money to find in this day and age. It's also an awful lot of money to spend in the next 2 to 3 years. But they have to do it very rapidly. Just in the next 3 months, they're hoping to have their 4G network alive in 16 cities. They've got roughly 12 months head start on O2 and Vodafone. And they're doing everything they can, or shall do everything they can in the next 12 months to capitalize on that head start. In this business, if you're first off the block, you have an instinctive advantage, whether you're in the fibre to the home business or in the mobile business. So this development, very recent, is stimulating investment among all of these guys. If I can get back to fibre, there are 3 different elements to this. Firstly, BT, its investment isn't mean, it's 2.5 billion over the next 3 years. Unfortunately, it is geared to fibre to the cabinet. It is a commercial consideration because the incumbent has its shareholders to answer to, and they're trying to convince people, the shareholders and the government, that fibre to the cabinet is going to be sufficient for its consumers. So that is a commercial consideration, which is unfortunate for just about everybody concerned in the long term. Investment is also going on for fibre to the home. Now, there are some pundits who say that fibre to the home is not demand-driven, but in many of these instances it is demand-driven. And it's not a mean process either. As you can see, the regulator assumes that there are about 100 or more small-scale fibre to the home projects. Now, these are independent of British Telecom. Many of them have taken their cue from community builds that we've seen in the Netherlands and across Scandinavia, and also in the Baltics have become very popular. Some of them are geared to individual small towns or collections of small towns. They sign up. They're the ones being demand-driven, saying BT or Virgin or Rutland Telecom isn't servicing us. Can you please organise or find someone to organise this fibre to the home infrastructure, and we'll do it ourselves. They can reduce engineering costs 90% by digging their own trenches. Some of them, the fibre to the home bills are regional. Broadband Telecom has now committed itself to fibre to the home throughout the county of Rutland and into areas of neighbouring Lincolnshire. KCOM, which is the incumbent up in the Hull region, they're going fibre to the home throughout their footprint. Again, in both instances, they're independent of British Telecom. And the third grouping is Virgin in combination with Cisco and Fujitsu. Now, what they've done is they're attacking it twofold. They're extending fibre to the home footprint. They're also investing in fibre to the home by tapping into British Telecom's cabinet infrastructure. So British Telecom goes to the cabinet and relies on copper from then on. Virgin is going in as a retailer to the cabinet and then putting its own fibre in. So they're going to be offering a gigabyte service to every premises. And you only have to see the advantage that they're going to have when BT is going to be offering up to 80 megabytes per second, but in reality, if your commenter from the exchange is going to be substantially lower than that, and then Virgin comes along with a letter in the letterbox saying you can either go for BT, but for an extra £20 a month, you can have a gigabyte service. So there is a proportionate value, whether or not you need that gigabyte service now. Instinctively, you're going to think that you've got a good deal. Virgin presents a very valuable test case because that is a company that has got the longest experience in what is termed superfast broadband. The data for their most recent quarter is showing the benefit. The company at the beginning of this year doubled its broadband data rates for every subscriber. Now, almost universally, its basic rate is 120 megabytes. The benefits are that over the last few quarters, ARPU has increased. It continues to do. ARPU is one of the key bases for assessing revenue as per capex. They're also finding that consumers are taking up premium services. It might not have been the case a few years ago that people would have thought that they needed Sky Premium and TV XL, but as soon as they start having 120 megs delivered to their door, Virgin is finding that people are signing up for this. So that helps to explain a higher ARPU. A full 65% of people taking the top tier level, the premiums and the TV XLs. And the very basic entry level 60 megabyte service, as you can see, the majority of people aren't doing it. They're paying that extra 10 or 20 pounds and they're getting the top level. So the investment is paying off.
That's interesting, Henry, because NBNco in Australia is saying exactly the same, that they are totally surprised by the uptake of the high end of broadband. That's the highest proportion of people taking that service. It's amazing.
If the experience of Virgin is anything to go by, well, everything everywhere is it's singing from the same hymn sheet. Virgin has got what they're trying to develop as an integrated mobile and fixed network. It is it is the largest in the NO. It's got 4 or 5 million subscribers, mobile subscribers. Everything everywhere. It's 1.5 billion investment. It's not just in its 4G network. It has an existing, very substantial fixed broadband network and subscriber base under the Orange band, which is now also being branded as EE. The 1.5 billion is going into tapping into British Telecom's network. 98% LTE coverage within the next couple of years. That's the end of 2014. And also tapping into 11 million homes, which is about 40% of the population. It is striving, rather like Virgin, it is striving to be a one-stop shop for both mobile and fixed. So everybody with their various multiplicity of devices, they don't need to have a separate mobile and separate fixed concept. Their device will operate outside and inside the home. They have one service provider for their integrated services under one integrated network. Now that's what EE is aiming for, and hence it's very substantial investment. Again, rather like Virgin found, churn is lower. The mobile market is so competitive, Vodafone often has churn of 20-25% a quarter. Customer acquisition costs are substantial. So if you can grab your competitors' subscribers and hold on to them, that's one of the key elements. With LTE, they've got this 12-month head start, and that is going to be the key differentiator. They're still going to maintain their ordinary 3G service, but they're going to encourage customers to go on to LTE. That should be quite successful because they're the only show in town. Prices will come down once Vodafone and O2 kickstart their own networks. But for the moment, again, investment should bring in extra revenue from the premium 4G sector. So, in sum, stimulants to investments, you have your top-down approach from the government with its broadband plan. You have pressure from the European Commission. Slightly longer term, they've got ambitions for 2020. There's a lot of rhetoric about smart grids and e-inclusion and the internet economy. Many politicians talk the talk. Some of them might not quite appreciate the depth of what they're talking about. But nevertheless, among the people who, such as ourselves, people who pay attention to this, this rhetoric does filter down, and to the more sophisticated broadband community, they can understand what broadband can do for them. Again, to reduce churn, customers are very focused on consumer expectations. Paul, your blog of a couple of days ago hit it on the head. Everyone is now, they put up with drop calls. Once you start using your smartphone to communicate to clients and to the office and conference things, drop calls just won't cut the mustard. If you're part of a network that is consistently dropping your video calls, you'll drop them, and you'll go to someone who has invested and has a much more stable network. So for consumers, it's really quite ruthless, and the operators understand it. If I were to predict for the next 5 years, I would say, sure, regulatory measures on termination rates and roaming and what have you, they will probably result in retail revenue for the sector dropping by another 3 to 4% for the next 5 years annually. With all these considerations and these stimuli for investment, I think it's quite safe to say that if you include the spectrum auctions next year, investment in the UK's telecom market should quite confidently increase by 2 to 3% annually. So as an end of this presentation, that should be quite encouraging.